Thank you very much for having me here today as a guest and talk about some of the research about machine learning and material science. So you will see there's some parallels to what Jana is doing, but it's not a surprise because we're also both of the members of the SIMPLAIX project, and our research is closely aligned. So my research group, as Tilman just said, is located at KIT in the computer science department, where we work on more fundamental method development on machine learning and AI methods, but always with the application of material science and chemistry in our mind. And you will see a couple of examples in the next minutes. So one of the big challenges, and Anja already mentioned this, and it's also an opportunity, is we have a large, what we call chemical space or material space. And a conservative estimate says there's 10 to the 60 potential small molecules. We talk about materials, this number is exponentially larger, of molecules that could have a property that we need for a certain application, be it to make our sore throat a bit better, or be it to be used in the next generation of photovoltaics to generate green energy. And finding these materials and finding them in an efficient way is one of the big challenges here. We now look at what is the standard today. So what are all the materials that we see around us? Where do they come from? Most of them, we have to say, they are made experimentally. So they were discovered in an experimental, let's say, trial and error, or more informed physics-based approach. So we can look into large libraries, for example, PubChem, which lists a lot of molecules that were synthesized in the past, more than 100 million compounds, very impressive number, which is basically all what humankind chemistry produced so far. Computer simulations, physics-based simulations can, of course, help here, and had an exponential impact here in the last decades in order to basically predict, based on physics knowledge, what are the properties of molecules and materials. So we can predict it on a computer and therefore accelerate the search for molecules and materials. Now, the topic of today is AI and machine learning. So the big question is, how can a data-driven approach rather than a physics-driven approach accelerate this process further? And I have two answers to that, and I would like to show today two examples of these two answers. So one is, we can, with machine learning and data-driven methods, basically see and exploit redundancies in the data that we're creating. So if we do experiments, then we might do an experiment that's very similar to an experiment someone else did in the past. And we might or might not know about this, because either we might just not know about that experiment, because we can't know everything that was ever done, or because we don't really easily find these redundancies. We don't see these two experiments are similar. Same with computer simulations. We might have already calculated the properties of a very, very similar molecule in the past, but maybe we don't know about a similarity, because similarity is a challenging topic. And machine learning can help us see these redundancies and avoid them, and therefore give us a large speed up. The other thing, machine learning is basically finding patterns in data. There's a lot of patterns in high-dimensional data sets, and finding these is helpful for the machine learning model to do good predictions, but it might also be helpful for us to better understand the machine learning model and therefore extract these very valuable structure-property relations, better understand what is the relationship between the structure of a molecule, the structure of a material, and the properties, and then exploit it for purposeful design of new materials and molecules. I would like to show today what are the methods that we're using. So those are both mostly graph neural networks we're using to predict materials properties. And then I would like to show how we can use them to accelerate simulations. And then in the last couple of minutes, I would like to show how we can extract better understanding of structure property relations in order to design molecules. So let's start with the models that we're using. And this, as Anja just said, in the last couple of years, there's an exponential increase in one particular model, and that's graph neural networks. So what is a graph neural network? And a graph neural network is a model, machine learning model, that's particularly well suited to represent anything that has a graph structure or a three-dimensional geometric structure. And molecules and materials do have that, because they consist of atoms that are arranged in certain configurations in space. And what a graph neural network does is it learns vector representations for each of the atoms in the system. So we just start by telling the model what are the atoms that we have in the system, and represent this as a vector. So you see these small vectors here. This is just a vector that represents an oxygen atom, and the vector that represents a carbon atom looks a bit different. And the machine learning model now learns how to pass basically messages from atoms to their neighboring atoms and inform them about their local environment. And a lot of the chemistry, a lot of physics is local, so it's important to know what is the local chemical environment around an atom. And this is learned by the machine learning model here, by the graph neural network, and it updates basically these vector representations. So it knows in the end, this is an oxygen atom surrounded by a certain very intricate geometric environment of other atoms that gives it the properties that we actually need in the end. We can use the same principle for materials. If we think about crystalline structures, we also learn there about basically what are the atoms that are involved in these structures. And now we can use the graph neural networks for a lot of different tasks. That starts with just predicting the properties of molecules and materials given data sets. We can screen then large amounts of materials to find good candidates. We can inverse design new materials. So we give the model what are the target properties we want to have, and the model should come up with a suggestion of what is the molecule or the material that we want to have. And today I would like to focus on two aspects of this. One is how we can use graph neural networks to accelerate atomistic simulations. And then how can we basically look into graph neural networks to see what they learn and exploit that in order to better understand structure-property relations. So let's look at the simulations, and also Anja already introduced it on her first slide. So if we want to simulate stuff, simulate atoms, simulate matter, we have to learn one relationship, and that's how to get from the structure, from the three-dimensional arrangement of atoms in space to the energy. And this can be done with many different ways. This can be done with classical force fields. So we basically put our physical laws into equations and say how do atoms interact with each other, very simple equations. Or we can do that using quantum mechanics, using density functional theory and other theories that, given a set of atoms in space, the coordinates, solve the Schrödinger equation and tell us what is the energy. And then we can use this energy prediction or the derivative of that energy prediction to get the forces. And using the forces, we know in which direction will the atoms move in the next time step. Very similar to the weather forecast predictions, where we go then time step by time step and predict what is the outcome, or what is the system in the next time step. And now machine learning models are kind of breaking out of this trade-off here between the system sizes and timescales we can reach and the accuracy and applicability that we can have here. And why do they break out? Because they avoid redundancies. When we run here any simulation, we always do the same simulation more or less over and over again, just with a tiny updated system. And it does a lot of calculations that are not necessary. Machine learning models are super good in learning to avoid these redundancies, learning, okay, I've already seen a system that looks almost like that, and I've seen other systems that look very similar, so I can interpolate perfectly and say, the prediction, the energy, the forces are that, without ever doing the force field calculation or the DFT calculation explicitly. And when we then add active learning, and I will not go into details here today, we can also explore systems. So we can also go outside of the initial data distribution and find and extrapolate to systems that we don't know in the beginning. And that breaking out of this trade-off here enables us to do a lot of applications that were not doable before. Those can be in biology, and I have an example for biology later. They can be in chemistry or material science, where we can simulate larger systems on longer timescales than what was ever possible using classical force fields or DFT before. And this is one of the projects that we look into in SIMPLAIX. It's a collaboration between the group of Frauke Greta and a PhD student, Meckrold Marlene Neubert, and of course also other people in Frauke Greta's group. And we're looking here at a particular reaction that happens in proteins, in collagen, and it's the transfer of a hydrogen atom here from a radical, or from a protein position into a radical. And this is important if we want to understand better certain diseases and how to cure these diseases related to collagen. So what we need is a model that can understand systems like that and then predict their time evolution, so we can basically track how do these hydrogen atoms move in complex biological systems. And these systems are very complex, so they're built of amino acids. From just 20 natural amino acids, we can make a lot of different dipeptides, so very small chains. We can have loads of different combinations. So for example, if we just use these 400 dipeptides, which are representing very small parts of a protein, we can make 160,000 combinations of 2 of these. And then we can basically make uncountable many geometries of these systems. And we want to always predict how is the hydrogen atom moving across from one strand of collagen to another one. And now we can approach that using DFT, not classical, quantum mechanical approaches. We can look at a few systems, maybe 5,000 systems. So we select a couple of dipeptides and look at maybe in 10 calculations, how is the hydrogen atom moving from one side to the other. So we kind of exploring that square of 10 calculations times 5,000 systems. And if we now train a model on this data, and use the machine learning model, then we can expand that. We can go to 1 million or even multiple millions of systems. So that's represented by this green box now here. And we can do tens of thousands of calculations to really explore the intricate pathway of how the hydrogen atom is actually moving and how the rest of the system is rearranging. And now if we compare to what the DFT calculations were able to do, this is this tiny box that is hard to see anymore here compared to what we can explore using the machine learning models. So just by exploiting these redundancies, we can explore an exponentially much larger space of possible configurations of systems and better understand and much faster predict how do these hydrogen atoms move in space. But now we have a really, really good model that's really fast in predicting stuff, but do we actually learn anything from it? Did we make any progress in science in the way that we better understand what the hydrogen is actually doing? I would argue, okay, we can see it, we can use the simulation as a microscope basically and look into matter in a way we can't do in experiments. But at the same time, the machine learning model kind of did the hard work. It kind of figured out what is the relationship between energy and the configuration. And we didn't really learn anything new from that. And particularly, we didn't know how does the machine learning model can be so much faster than, for example, density functional theory calculations. And how can we make them faster? So in the last part, in the next couple of minutes, I would like to explore with you how we can open the machine learning model black box and look into it and better understand what is going on. So if we want to get explanations, we first have to think about what is actually an explanation. If we do machine learning on images, what's very obvious is we want to, for example, know where's the machine learning model looking into when it classifies whether this image is showing a dog or a cat. And we can use that using these lines in maps that are basically showing us, okay, the machine learning model was looking in that part of the picture in order to find out what is a dog. So this is working well. What does that mean for molecules, for graphs in more general? We can make the same principle here. We have a graph. This could be a molecule or any other graph. And a very basic, most basic explanation would be where is the machine learning model looking into this graph when it does the prediction? So what are the important parts of the graph that were relevant for the property of the molecule? So we can say a most basic explanation would be on a graph level, just noting what nodes and which atoms are involved in the prediction. And many explanation or XAI methods are looking into the problem in the following way. They train a machine learning model in order to be as good as possible, and then they try to understand this. And this is kind of not the way we would, in like natural ways, learn. We learn basically from explanations rather than first from data. So we would like to have a model that is getting better explanations if the model is actually better. And this is typically not the case in this post hoc approach of like training a model and trying to open it. So we tried to make a graph neural network that can generate very instructive explanations in terms of like what is important. The model should improve their predictions when they generate explanations. So there should be like a positive trade-off rather than a negative trade-off. And ideally, we also want models that can learn from prior knowledge. But we were not able to demonstrate that yet. And that's also partly because the data is missing. So data is always a big challenge. So how does this model look like? I won't go into details. We have on the input side here our atoms and nodes that go into the graph neural network. We can also put in masks, the explanations, but we don't do that yet. And on the output side, we have the predicted property and again, masks that tell us what was important. And I want to just put your attention to a very tiny detail. There's one arrow here going from the explanation up to the prediction again. So when the model says this part of the molecule or the material is important, then what we do is we limit the receptive field of the model basically to that part. So the model is limiting itself by generating an explanation and can only look at the part that it deems important for the prediction. So the explanation and the prediction are influencing each other. And when the model says, I only want to look at this tiny group of the molecule when predicting the property, and this works, then this obviously has a very good reason. If the model wants to look at the entire molecule, then everything is kind of important, and the model has to learn that trade-off. So now we can apply this to simple data sets, for example, to predict the solubility of a molecule in water. And we can ask the model now what is responsible of this particular molecule for having a high or a low water solubility, and we get almost textbook-like explanations. So we get explanations like this long carbon chain here is lowering the water solubility, whereas this let's say oxygen-rich polar group is increasing the water solubility. For another molecule, this looks completely different. Here, this molecule is highly insoluble in water, and here the model says basically the entire molecule. There's nothing in the molecule that increases the water solubility, so everything is responsible for low water solubility. This works for a lot of different molecules and also other types of materials. So we can basically learn from the model what is relevant for a given prediction. If you want to try that out, we have a website here, megan.aimat.science, where you can like play with the models. You can put in your favorite molecule and get explanations for not only solubility, but also different other properties. So the question is, can we now use that knowledge that we gained from the model to design better molecules? And here I would like to show a case study that we did with the group of Rebecca Davis at the University of Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada, where we looked at drug-like molecules. And the challenge here is that some of the drug candidates are aggregating. So they're forming aggregates in solution, and they cannot act in a single molecule way in the way they should. So aggregation is something in drug design that you want to avoid. You want to design molecules that are not aggregating. So what we looked at is a candidate for a drug molecule, this cleoquinol, and this has a very strong tendency to aggregate. And also the model correctly predicts that this molecule is an aggregator. So it says with 81% probability, this is an aggregating molecule. And on top of that, it also tells us why. So it says, okay, this part that is here colored in red is the part of the molecule that tends to aggregate. And now we can look into that. And I'm not a chemist, so it's a bit also tricky here for me to interpret that. But there are some parts that you don't want to change because they are responsible for the drug-like character of the molecule. But for example, there's this OH group here, which could be in principle modified. And this seems to be relevant for the aggregation tendency. So we know exactly where to attack the molecule and where to change it in order to make better non-aggregating molecules. So a tiny change, and that's also confirmed by the model, tiny change in this OH group, making it a methoxy group here, is changing completely the character of the molecule. And this was suggested by the model itself. Change this OH group to a methoxy group. This can be automated, so it's actually not human designed, but designed by the machine learning model here. And this changes the aggregation from 81% to just 8%. And just 2 weeks ago, we got the nice results from experimental synthesis and characterization that this modified molecule is actually not an aggregator anymore. So we could use the explanations here to design better drug candidates. Now, of course, we have to test whether this is actually still having the same functionality. But this is actually helping us to better understand the molecule and know how to modify it in order to make better molecules. And of course, this can be extended. So if any of the scientists here in the room have an interesting data set, I'm always willing to explore that with you and see whether our model can A, explain what is going on in this data set, and B, maybe also design better molecules. So with this, I'm at the end of my talk. I'm very happy to answer your questions, and I thank you very much for your attention.